There are 40 people on death row in the state of Tennessee. John Bain, 34 years on death row. Bain was found guilty and given the death penalty for the 1988 murder of 60-year-old Royce Frazier. An electrical cord was wrapped around Frazier's neck, a plastic bag had been thrown over his head, and he had been gagged. It appeared that a plunger had been placed over his face to keep his head under water. Frazier's home had been broken into. Ashtrays and many lamps had been tipped over. Byron Black, 35 years on death row. 3 counts of first-degree murder were brought against Black in 1989 in connection with the shooting deaths of his girlfriend, Angela Clay, and her 2 daughters, Latoya and Lakeisha Clay. Black was given 2 life sentences for the murders of Angela and Latoya and the death penalty for the murder of Lakeisha. The bodies of Angela and her 9-year-old daughter Latoya were found in the master bedroom. Angela was laying in bed when she was shot once in the top of the head while she slept. She passed away a short while later. Latoya's body was discovered tucked in between a dresser and a bed. She had received a single gunshot wound to the chest and neck. Given the bullet route and type of hit, it seemed likely that she died 3 to 10 minutes after the shooting rather than instantly. 6-year-old Lakeisha's body was discovered face down on the floor beside her bed in the second bedroom. She had been shot twice, once in the pelvic region and once in the chest. After being shot, she passed away in 5 to 30 minutes. Black's fingerprints were found at the scene. Andre Bland, 30 years on death row. Bland was found guilty of shooting and killing untrained Sanders in the parking lots of an apartment complex in Memphis. Sanders was taken to the hospital by the first ambulance to arrive on the site. His condition was extremely serious when the paramedics arrived, despite the fact that they reached the location 9 minutes after getting the call. While traveling to the hospital, he passed away. On October 12, 1992, in the afternoon, about 2 days after the murder, Bland turned himself in to the Memphis Police Department at the request of his mother and grandmother. Kevin Burns, 28 years on death row. Damon Dawson, Tracy Johnson, Eric Thomas, and Tommy Blackman were 4 young men seated in a car in Dawson's Memphis driveway on April 20, 1992. Thomas was in the back seat behind Dawson, Blackman was in the back seat behind Johnson. Dawson was in the driver's seat and Johnson was in the front passenger seat. Carlito Adams and Kevin Burns, 2 people who knew Blackman, approached the car's passenger side. Adams drew a pistol and motioned for Blackman to exit the vehicle. Burns drew a pistol and walked around the driver's side of the vehicle when Blackman refused. Blackman eventually exited the vehicle and ran away. "Get him," Adams said, and a few more guys emerged from behind bushes to open fire on Blackman. At Dawson's house, 14-year-old Eric Jones and 3 of his pals were playing basketball. Jones observed the males in the car taking cash out of their wallets and taking off jewelry. Jones saw Blackman rushing at him a few seconds later. Jones and Blackman fled to the back of the house under gunfire, while Jones's 3 pals fled to a nearby yard. Jones heard 7 or 8 additional gunshots after entering the residence. The Dobsons resided across the street from Eric Jones's mother, Mary Jones. She witnessed Adams fire 1 shot at Johnson's chest. She watched as Kevin Burns repeatedly shot Dobson, moved to the front of the vehicle, and then shot Dobson once more. Mrs. Jones categorically identified Burns and said that as he ran towards her following the shootings, she had a real good look at his face. Tracy Johnson died at the scene. When police came, Damon Dawson, who had 5 gunshot wounds to his arm, buttocks, chest, and hip, was still alive. However, after being taken to the hospital, he passed away. 2 days after the event, Eric Thomas, who had been shot in the stomach and chest, made the photo identification of Kevin Burns. Thomas stated in his testimony that after robbing him and his pals of their money and jewels, Burns and the others had opened fire. Burns was located and taken into custody in Chicago on June 23, 1992. Tony Carothers, 28 years on death row. In 1994, drug dealer Marcellus Anderson, 21 years old, his mother, and one of Anderson's adolescent accomplices were abducted. Tony Von Carothers and accomplice James Montgomery were found guilty in this crime. After the 2 male victims were shot, they were all buried alive along with Anderson's mother in Memphis Rose Hill Cemetery in a grave that had been dug for a burial. Preston Carter, 29 years on death row. In 1995, Carter received a death sentence for shooting Tensia and Thomas Jackson Jr. to death after breaking into their house. Beside her father's body, the couple's unharmed 3-year-old daughter was discovered covered in blood. Tyrone Chalmers, 26 years on death row. The body of the 28-year-old African-American victim, Randy Allen, was found face down on the pavement in Memphis, near to Netherwood Street, on August 20, 1994. He had been shot 5 times, and his underpants and pants had been yanked down around his ankles. There were 2 fatal wounds, one to the head and one to the back. Chalmers was found guilty of the murder. He robbed Allen of $3. Cedric Clayton, 9 years on death row. The state of Tennessee sentenced Clayton to death for 3 counts of murder. Following a fight with his fiancée, he shot 3 people: his girlfriend, Passia Fisher, her 56-year-old father, Antheo Fisher, and his 46-year-old wife, Patricia Fisher. Clayton and Passia had a 4-year-old daughter together. Lamarcus Davidson, 14 years on death row. He killed and tortured a young couple in Knox County, earning him a death sentence in October 2009. In 2007, Davidson and other armed men carjacked Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom while they were out on a date. They were both essayed and tortured. Jesse Dotson, 13 years on death row. In less than 2 hours, the jury found Dotson guilty of shooting his brother, his brother's girlfriend, and 2 other adults, as well as fatally stabbing his 2 nephews, ages 2 and 4. Dotson was sentenced to die by lethal injection. Despite being stabbed, 3 more kids made it out of the horrific slaughter alive. Following a night of drinking, on March 2, 2008, early in the morning, Jesse Dotson shot and killed his brother, Cecil Dotson, in the head following an argument. Then, armed with 2 firearms, many knives and boards, he pursued everyone else inside the house. Marissa Williams, the fiancée of Cecil Dotson, Samario Dotson, age 4, Cecil Dotson II, age 2, and friends Hollis Seals and Shinri Robertson were also killed. John Hall, 27 years on death row. For killing his estranged wife Billie Jo Hall in Jackson in February 1997, Hall received a death sentence. Chief Jerry Bingham of the Henderson County Sheriff's Department was the first to arrive on the scene. The victim's body was floating face down in the water when he arrived. He contacted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and Emergency Medical Services right away. It was not long after midnight that Agent Brian Bird reached the site. When he got into the house, the master bedroom wasn't clean. The bed, a countertop, and the wedding dress were all covered in bloodstains. According to the testimony of the forensic doctor who conducted the autopsy, suffocation from a combination of manual strangulation and drowning was the main cause of death. William Hall, 32 years on death row. The 1988 home murders of an elderly Stewart County couple resulted in the conviction of William Hall and Derek Quintero. Quintero and Hall had broken free from a Kentucky prison when they carried out the killings. Next to his bed on the floor stood Mr. Vester's lifeless body. Blood stained the bed and the pillow as the sheets were pulled back. On the floor of Myrtle Vester's bedroom, close to the restroom, was discovered her lifeless body in a dried blood puddle. She'd suffered 3 gunshot wounds. In addition, she had suffered 13 stab wounds. According to the medical examiner's testimony, the Vesters passed away 2 hours after eating dinner. James Hawkins, 12 years on death row. After James Hawkins' 3 children delivered detailed testimony about how he stabbed, strangled, and then mutilated their mother's body, a jury found him guilty of murder. Hawkins' 15-year-old daughter, who was just 12 years old when her mother was killed, served as the main witness against him. She spoke about being essayed by her father on multiple occasions. She also told the jury that she was even pregnant due to her father, but she miscarried. Hawkins vowed to kill her if she revealed their relationship to anybody. On February 9, 2008, the girl claimed to have witnessed her father stab and strangle her mother. She claimed that Hawkins coerced her into helping him place the body in a freezer before chopping it up with a knife. She added that as Hawkins cut off the head, she had to hold it. In their testimony, Hawkins' 2 boys stated that on the day of the murder, their father had taken them to buy a saw and that they had assisted him in taking out a mattress from the couple's bedroom. Hawkins didn't take the stand. Although he admitted to mutilating the corpse, he said that his daughter had killed Gator, and he claimed he was simply assisting in the cover-up. Kenneth Henderson, 25 years on death row. During an attempt to break out of the Fayette County Jail in 1997, Henderson shot and killed 43-year-old Fayette County Deputy Tommy Bishop by shooting him through the back of the skull at point-blank range. He was detained at the Fayette County Jail at the time of the incidents that gave birth to this case, serving consecutive terms for felony escape and aggravated burglary. Anthony Himes, 38 years on death row. Himes was found guilty in 1985 of killing, essaying, and robbing a motel maid in Kingston Springs. On March 3, 1985, between 1 and 1:30 p.m., Catherine Jean Jenkins's body was found in room 21 of the Sebon Motel. It was covered in a sheet. The victim was a motel maid who was finishing up her room's cleaning when she was killed. Her outerwear had been drawn up to cover her breasts. She also had a $20 bill under her watch's wrist strap. The cause of death was multiple stab wounds to the chest. Henry Hodges, 32 years on death row. Hodges was found guilty of Ronald Bassett, a phone repairman in Nashville, being robbed and strangled in May 1990. In December 1992, after entering a guilty plea for the 1989 stabbing death of Inglewood nurse Barry McDonald, he was given a second life term. Nicholas Johnson, 17 years on death row. The state of Tennessee sentenced Johnson to death for the murder of a police officer. In court records, Johnson and his girlfriend were engaged in a domestic dispute when Bristol police officer Mark Vance showed up at the door to look into a complaint. Johnson was 26 years old at the time and the father of 2 children with 2 different women. His now girlfriend was also pregnant, and he was insisting for her not to keep the baby. Johnson shot the officer during the argument. Henry Jones, 14 years on death row. In 2009, Jones received a death sentence in Shelby County, Tennessee. He was accused of killing a couple while robbing them at their residence. In 2014, Jones was given a death sentence in Florida for the 19-year-old Carlos Perez's murder. David Jordan, 17 years on death row. Jordan was found guilty of the 2005 shooting rampage at a state maintenance garage in West Tennessee that claimed the life of his estranged wife, Donna Renee Jordan, as well as 2 other individuals, Jerry Wayne Hopper, a Forestry Department employee, and David Gordon, a Jackson-based delivery company worker. David Keene, 32 years on death row. In 1990, Keene entered a guilty plea for the essay and strangulation of Millington resident Ashley Nicole Reed, 8 years old. In addition to many cuts and bruises to her face and neck, the medical examiner testified that Nikki had a severe ligature mark across the front of her neck from a tightly pulled string, possibly a shoelace. This is his confession to the police. I pulled off to the side of the road and undressed Ashley and undid my pants, and I held my hand over her throat and tried to essay her. I felt bad and I stopped, and Ashley had turned blue in the face. She wasn't breathing. I tied a shoelace around her neck and she was still not breathing. I untied the shoelace, wrapped her up in a blanket, tied the blanket together, and dumped her off into the river off of the old Auction Street boat dock. Then I went back over to West Memphis and told Ashley's mother that she was spending the night at her friend Chantel's house. Terry King, 39 years on death row. Diana K. Smith, the victim, was approached by Terry King and his cousin, Don King, on July 31, 1984, in the afternoon as they were touring Cherokee Lake. After leaving, the 3 went to Don King's trailer, Terry King accompanying the victim in her vehicle. Terry King then went and got himself some LSD. He took some, and so did the victim. King had also consumed beer all day long and taken 1 or more tablets of substances. After getting to Don King's trailer, the victim carried on with her wine consumption. Terry King had essayed the victim and took her for a drive in her vehicle. She eventually questioned him, "Why did you all essay me?" After that, King forced her to get into the car's trunk and drove to the residence of his buddy and fellow defendant, Randall Joe Sexton. King talked to Sexton and took his firearm. He got back in the victim's vehicle and drove away. Sexton drove with his own vehicle alongside King. King eventually forced the victim to exit her car's trunk and lie face down on the ground as he took her to a forested area close to a brook. Then he killed her by shooting her at least once in the back of the skull. The following day, King and Sexton went back to dispose of the body, tossing it into a quarry lake after putting it in a tent and weighing it down with cinder blocks. A few days later, the body was found. Following their arrests, both Sexton and King provided statements to the police after relinquishing their rights. The two guys faced trial together. Larry McKay, 41 years on death row. Melvin Wallace Jr. entered the LNG Sundry store at 1069 North Watkins in Memphis on August 29, 1981, at around 11 p.m. to buy 2 barbecue sandwiches. Wallace knew 2 of the men working at the Sundry store since he was a frequent customer. The employees were Benjamin Cook and Steve Jones. There were 4 men inside the store when he arrived. Michael Eugene Sample and Larry McKay were the 2 other black guys. Although they were strangers to Wallace, at 2:43 p.m. on August 31, 1981, he positively identified them in a lineup as Cook and Jones murderers and Sample as the man who had shot him in the leg and back and tried to shoot him in the head. Wallace stated in his deposition that he followed Cook to the back of the shop where the sandwiches were being made. McKay was standing in the back, muttering to himself while holding a quart of 45 beer. Wallace turned to face Jones and Sample in front of the store, not wanting to engage into a fight with an inebriated person. He turned to face Cook when he thought the sandwiches would be ready. Sample yelled at Wallace to stop and shot him in the thigh after Wallace broke and ran for the front door when he realized that was a robbery. Sample approached Wallace while he was trying to act dead, said, "This man ain't dead," and then shot him in the back. Wallace had heard Sample demanding that Jones gave him all of the money and heard Jones say, "Man, I gave you everything I had." Cook was shot in the head by McKay, according to Wallace's testimony. Sample returned to the floor where Wallace lay and placed a pistol to his head. It clicked multiple times without going off. According to Wallace's testimony, he came up off the floor and engaged Sample in wrestling. Wallace went unconscious as the gun went off just past his head. The last thing Wallace heard before he passed out was Sample saying, "Let's get the hell out of here." Wallace was able to provide the police with information about the incident and the description of the killers. Cook and Jones passed away from the gunshot wounds to the heads. Donald Milbrooks, 34 years on death row. In 1987, Milbrooks was found guilty of torturing and killing Kerrick Majors, a 14-year-old. The teen's nude body was discovered in a dry creek bed in East Nashville, having been beaten, stabbed, suffocated, essayed with a stick, sliced in a X pattern on the chest, and laying beneath a mattress. At the time of the incident, Milbrooks, who was 24 years old, along with his 17-year-old wife, Tammy, and 16-year-old buddy, Roger Brewington, pursued the victim and his companions from a temporary flea market in Nashville. Majors was taken by them, who then knocked him down and pulled him into a forested location. For multiple hours, the 4'11" tall and 112 pounds victim was subjected to torment. He was forced to drink human waste. They cut an X onto his chest. He was burned, he was essayed with a stick, struck with brass knuckles, and fatally stabbed. The victim, according to Middlebrooks' confession, was in tears and begged to have the opportunity to go to school and get an education. Majors, who was black, was the target of racial slurs from the white defendants. Ershawn Miller, 6 years on death row. The state of Tennessee sentenced Miller to death for killing someone during a robbery. Court filings state that Ershawn Miller shot and killed clerk Ahmad Dalai while he was robbing the bull market on Hollywood Drive in Jackson. He also fired shots at another worker who was present. Ferris Morris, 27 years on death row. In 1997, Ferris Jenner Morris Jr. was found guilty in Madison County of essaying Ragland's wife Angela in the Jackson home of the Raglands, as well as killing Charles Ragland and his 15-year-old niece Erica Hurd. In Jackson, Tennessee, Charles and Angela Ragland occupied a duplex home. Ferris Morris shared the adjacent home with his wife. Morris assured Angela he would let her go once he heard his wife in the next house. At that time, he had already committed the murders and assaulted Angela. He told her to tell the police that she had discovered her husband and cousin's body when she got home that morning. Morris cleaned his hands on whatever he had touched with a rag and told Angela not to call the police. Angela made her way to a friend's house nearby, where she was driven to the police station. Shortly after, the police discovered Morris at his house and took him into custody. The bodies of Erica Hurd and Charles Ragland were found inside the Ragland home. Charles Ragland sustained a head wound. Erica Hurd had suffered multiple beatings and stabbings. A huge butcher knife with blood traces was discovered in a living room chair, and a blood-stained steak knife was discovered under a couch. Clarence Nesbitt, 29 years on death row. Nesbitt was found guilty in the 1993 shooting death of 20-year-old Miriam Cannon in Memphis. Cannon's body was covered in burns and branding, and it looked like she had been struck on the soles of her feet with a coat hanger or something similar. 4 out of Miriam Cannon's 5 small children were there in the flat when Nesbitt, who was 19 at the time, shot her in the head. A medical examiner stated that the woman had endured phalanga, a type of torture in which she had been burned and had scratched and bruised feet before the fatal shooting. He claimed that because the torture was administered over a long length of time, she would have experienced both physical and mental agony and suffering. Harold Nichols, 34 years on death row. Nichols is incarcerated on death row for the 1988 essay and killing of Karen Pewley, a 21-year-old. Nichols was found guilty of essaying several additional women. On June 9, 2022, Nichols was scheduled to get a fatal injection, but his execution was postponed. He had previously been scheduled for lethal injection in 2020, but because of the global context and health concerns at the time, he also escaped the death penalty back then. Richard Odom, 31 years on death row. On January 16, 2008, Odom received a death sentence for the essay and killing of Minna Johnson, a 77-year-old woman, while he was evading a Mississippi murder conviction. Minna Ethel Johnson's body was discovered in the rear seat floorboard of her car in a Memphis, Tennessee parking garage on May 10, 1991. The victim was bleeding from her private parts and her lower body had been left uncovered. The victim had 2 bloody handprints on her hips and many stab wounds on her back. In testimony, Memphis Police Department Sergeant Ronnie McWilliams stated that Odom's arrest on May 13, 1991, was made possible by fingerprints discovered in the victim's vehicle. Krista Pike, 28 years on death row. She was found guilty of torturing and killing her classmate Colleen Slemmer when she was just 18 years old. Krista believed that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tedderil Shipp. On January 12, 1995, Pike, Shipp, Slemmer, and another friend of Pike's, Shadola Peterson, left their university dormitories to take a walk in the woods. Colleen was told that the purpose of this gathering was to reach an agreement and stop the constant fighting between them. What she didn't know was that both Pike and her boyfriend had developed an interest in the occult and satanic worship, and they had other intentions. Slammer was attacked by Pike and Shipp, while Peterson served as a lookout as soon as they arrived at the remote area. In later court testimony, it was stated that Slammer was taunted, beaten, and cut over the following 30 minutes, while also having a pentagram etched into her chest. Slammer was killed when Pike finally crushed her skull with a sizable piece of asphalt. A portion of Slammer's skull was retained by Pike, and the next day she started showing it around to other students. This is what led to the group's arrest less than 36 hours later. While Pike received the death penalty, her boyfriend got life in prison with the possibility of parole, and Peterson pled guilty, but she only got probation because she became an informant. It was discovered that Krista Pike had all 3 major common traits between murderers: a history of childhood abuse, a mental illness, and brain damage, most probably due to prenatal alcohol exposure. If the state carries out the punishment, she will be the first female to be executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. Gerald Powers, 25 years on death row. Powers was found guilty of aggravated robbery and first-degree criminal murder. In 1996, he was found guilty of killing Shannon Sanderson, a 25-year-old, and was later sentenced to 30 years in jail for aggravated robbery. Shannon Sanderson's highly decomposed body was found in a storage closet in the back of an abandoned house on Highway 301 in Eudora, Mississippi, on May 9, 1996. The identical clothes she had on the night she vanished were still on the body. Her jewels had vanished. Sanderson died from a single gunshot wound to the right side of her skull, according to the results of her autopsy. Upon examining the skull, it was discovered that she had also sustained at least one significant facial blow. Corino Pruitt, 16 years on death row. Following the death of Lawrence Guidroz, 79-year-old, Pruitt was found guilty of first-degree murder. In August 2005, while Guidroz was leaving an Oak Haven grocery shop, Pruitt carjacked and attacked him. Charles Rice, 22 years on death row. When Emily Branch's body was discovered in a forested location close to Bellevue and Chelsea, it had 16 stab wounds. Her body was found on June 25, 2000, after she was reported missing on June 18th. Emily's body was discovered in a densely forested area to the right of the opening, in what looked to be a dry creek bed. Her underwear was pulled down, and her white short overalls were pulled all the way down to her ankles. She had her shirt on still. Michael Rimmer, 25 years on death row. In 1997, Rimmer was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering his 45-year-old ex-girlfriend, Richie Lynn Ellsworth. Ellsworth worked as a night clerk at a motel in Memphis before going missing. Money was taken from a cash register, and her blood was discovered in a motel office. After being incarcerated for 7 years for the essay of Ellsworth, she vanished 5 months later. Richie Ellsworth's blood was the only thing that the police ever found of her. Gregory Robinson, 25 years on death row. Robinson was found guilty of giving the order for a Memphis gang to murder Vernon Green in 1997 after a fight between two rival gangs while Green was an innocent bystander. Robinson advised gang members to take him fishing, according to court filings. Police records also say that Green was brought to a park where he was repeatedly shot and abused. William Rogers, 24 years on death row. Rogers received a death sentence for the abduction, essay, and killing of Jackie Bird, a 9-year-old. In order to win her trust, he had pretended to be a policeman. Authorities think the girl was kidnapped on July 8, 1996, while picking blackberries close to her Montgomery County home. 4 months later, deer hunters in the Stewart County portion of land between the lakes discovered her dead. In her deposition, Rogers' estranged wife said that the two of them visited land between the lakes on July 4, 1996. They halted their journey at a picnic spot off Dover Road, perhaps 10 to 15 miles away from the location of Jackie's body. Rogers told his wife that you could bury a body back here and nobody would know, after strolling through the woods. Michael Sample, 41 years on death row. Following the shooting murders of two Shelby County store workers during a 1981 robbery, Michael Eugene Sample and Larry McKay were found guilty on 2 counts of felony murder each, and they both received the death penalty. During the robbery, they murdered 2 employees of the store and shot multiple times a customer. That customer survived and was able to help the authorities identify the perpetrators. Vincent Sims, 26 years on death row. Sims was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and exceptionally aggravated burglary in connection with the shooting death of Forrest Smith. Smith had an entry and exit wound to his head from a bullet. One portion of the bullet left Smith's body in front of his right ear, and the other remained in his skull above his right ear. Smith also sustained many strikes to his buttocks, back, sides, arms, neck, and shoulders. Smith had been struck by a long, narrow, rod-shaped item that was at least 1/4 of an inch wide, based on the bruising. According to Dr. Gunter, Smith had likely been struck more than 10 times. The bruises on Smith's body, according to her, indicated how powerful the strikes were. Smith took at least 6 hits to the head, one of which cracked the back of his skull. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Stephen Symes believed that Smith had sustained a gunshot wound to the head before his head injury. Gunter testified that all of the injuries combined to cause death, even though the gunshot wound to the head was the worst and would have done it on its own. Oscar Smith, 33 years on death row. A Davidson County jury condemned Smith to death in 1990 for killing his estranged wife, Judy Roberts Smith, and her 13 and 16-year-old boys, Jason and Chad Burnett. The boys can be heard crying out "Frank, no" during a 911 call on tape that was used as evidence during Smith's trial. Before hanging up the phone, Jason was able to share his location with the police. 5 minutes later, officers who had been dispatched to the site arrived at the house. When they knocked on the front door, nobody answered. The officers concluded that there had been a false call because everything seemed to be peaceful, and they just left. It was not until 3 p.m. the next day that the bodies of Judy, Jason, and Chad were discovered. Chad's body was found face up on the kitchen floor. The phone had been ripped off the wall, and there was a lot of blood on the floor and wall. The room was a complete mess. The chamber had an awl, a device used in leatherworking that resembles an ice pick. 3 shots had hit Chad, one in the upper chest, one in the right shoulder, and one in the inside of the left eyebrow. The final 2 wounds were deadly contact wounds. In addition, Chad suffered many knife stab wounds to his back, belly, and chest. He had cuts on his hands from defense, and his neck had been slashed. His injuries had all happened prior to his passing. Judy Smith's body was discovered in the front bedroom, lying on its back on a bed. The paneled wall beside the bed had blood all over it. She had sustained gunshot wounds to her neck and left arm. The gunshot wound destroyed her spinal cord and resulted in immediate paralysis, unconsciousness, and death. Her neck had been sliced shortly after her death, and similar to Chad, she had been stabbed with a knife and something that looked like an ice pick or awl. According to the medical examiner, Judy and Chad both passed away from many gunshot and stabbing wounds. The youngest son of Judy, Jason, who called 911, was found dead, laying on his left side on the floor near the foot of the bed where his mother was laying. He was not shot, but his hands were covered with several defensive wounds. He had been stabbed in the chest and abdomen, and his neck had been cut. 2 of the cuts to the abdomen had been lethal because they had cut important veins. Through these wounds, his small bowel protruded from his body. Jason had sustained all of his injuries before passing away. According to the medical examiner's testimony, he suffered many stab wounds, and this caused him to bleed to death over a period of several minutes. Jonathan Stevenson, 33 years on death row. Stevenson was found guilty of employing a hitman to murder his wife Lisa, who was fatally shot in the head in 1989 with a powerful rifle. Despite their disagreements over who actually fired the last shot, Stevenson or Ralph Thompson, the hired hitman, both men were found guilty in different trials. The highest court in the state held that Stevenson should die for luring his wife away from their 4-year-old son and 8-month-old infant, and for promising to pay for her murder with money, a truck, a motor, and a boat. Because of the notoriety surrounding Stevenson's trial, Thompson's trial was moved to another location, and the Sevier County jury returned a life sentence. Dennis Suttles, 26 years on death row. In 1996, Suttles was found guilty of pursuing his ex-girlfriend Patricia Gale Rhodes, 44 years old, in a South Knoxville Taco Bell parking lot before fatally stabbing and slicing her in front of her 15-year-old daughter. In April 1995, Rhodes and Suttles got together and started dating. As the relationship developed, the man proposed to Rhodes for marriage in October 1995. The engagement was postponed because her divorce was not yet final. Christina, the woman's 15-year-old daughter, and Suttles moved into a newly acquired home together in December 1995. Suttles gave Rhodes an engagement ring for Christmas. Following an argument with Suttles in February 1996, the woman moved out of their home. The victim's co-workers had observed deep, fingerprint-like bruises on the victim's neck around the time of this argument. Suttles acknowledged in his testimony that he attempted to break the victim's necklace and remove the engagement ring from her finger during the fight. Suttles was devastated by the relationship's end. He made repeated attempts to persuade the victim to come back to him. He would leave cards on her car's windshield, contact her multiple times while she was at work, occasionally wait for her, and make an effort to talk to her anytime he saw her in public. Christina, who witnessed the attack on her mother, testified. He cut her on the neck. He slit her neck all to pieces, and he stabbed her in the face and cut her lip, and he cut her hair and he cut her body. He then stabbed her. And I saw him flip over and he stabbed her in the back. I was about 3 feet back because she kept telling me to get back and she kept screaming. Christina also said that when Santos was done, he smiled at her as he was driving away. Gary Sutton, 27 years on death row. In February 1992, Gary Wayne Sutton and James Henderson Dellinger were found guilty of the murders of Tommy Griffin and his sister Connie Brennan. On February 21, 1992, Griffin, 24 years old, was shot with a shotgun at close range, and his body was left by the Little River in Townsend. On February 24th, the body was discovered. The burned-out body of Connie Brennan, who was 34 years old, was discovered in her car. Heck Tran, 34 years on death row. Heck Van Tran had only been employed at the Jade East restaurant in Memphis for a few weeks when, in 1987, he and 3 other young men broke into the restaurant with the intention of robbing it. He confessed to murdering 2 out of 3 employees who died that day. The victims were Arthur Lee, 24 years old, his grandmother, Kay Ying Chue, 70 years old, and Lee's sister-in-law, Man Yin Huang, 23 years old. Howard Willis, 13 years on death row. A Jonesboro jury found Howard Hawk Willis guilty of killing 17-year-old Adam and 16-year-old Samantha Christmer, 2 teenagers from Chickamauga who were newlyweds. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors showed jurors body shots that made one juror feel sick. Adam's hands were found in a river by a fisherman. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.